Good afternoon, and welcome to the Jewish Policy Center webinar. I am Shoshana Bryan, Senior Director of the JPC and your host. Before we go to our guest, Professor Mark Meirowitz, here is your JPC commercial. So people ask me why, as we enter our third year of webinar programming, why I'm still doing the commercial. Thank you for asking, because that gives me an opportunity to brag in two different directions. First, about the JPC. And second, to say that there are new people on this webinar program every week, and I love it. So it's great, and you should keep sending out this invitation to your friends and broadening our circle. And now your commercial. The JPC was established in 1985 as a 501c3 organization, providing analysis of both foreign and domestic policies. You can find us on our website, jewishpolicycenter.org. There you can sign up for our Insight articles, and you can see our magazine In Focus Quarterly. Right now we have the winter issue up. It's called An Agenda for the New Congress, but pretty soon we will get to our annual spring Israel issue. I got to tell you, that's our favorite issue. And this being the 75th anniversary of the founding of the modern state of Israel, we are really happy about it. jewishpolicycenter.org. The JPC supports a strong American defense capability, U.S.-Israel security cooperation, and missile defense. We support the legitimacy and security of Israel against anyone who would deny them. As an organization that sits slightly to the right of center, the JPC advocates for small government, low taxes, free trade, fiscal responsibility, energy security, free speech, and intellectual diversity. That's us. A reminder for you, send your questions to the Q&A function. We are monitoring it during the program. And now our guest, Dr. Mark Meirowitz. Many of you have seen him before on this program or read him in Focus Quarterly, is a professor of humanities at the Maritime College of the State University of New York. He teaches American history, foreign policy, and the Constitution. His classes have included, you're going to want to sign up now for the Maritime College. His classes have included Supreme Court and the Constitution, the immigrant experience in America, American women's history and labor history, and America in the 20th century. He'll get to the 21st century soon, we think. You can read him in the fall 2022 issue of In Focus Quarterly in an outstanding article called America, Not an Ordinary Country, which is perhaps a topic for another program. On today's agenda is Mark's experience in Turkish foreign policy, U.S.-Turkish relations, and Turkish-Israeli relations. And we are really lucky to have him right now because the earthquake has been an earthquake in more than one way, and he's going to talk about that. He holds a PhD in political science from Fordham University and a JD from Brooklyn Law School. As you can see, he is a Renaissance man. So it's with great pleasure, Mark Meirowitz, that I move to you with the first question. The first question has to be about the earthquake. Clearly, it was a social, political, military, and every other kind of earthquake. Talk to us about what this does to Turkey, to Turkish people's perceptions of themselves, to the Turkish government. What are the things that underlie all the wreckage in Turkey?
Well, first of all, I wanted to thank you, Shoshana, for the amazing work you do and what you've done with the Jewish Policy Center to make it really a center of intellectual thought and dialogue on so many issues. And I think it's a privilege to say this, to work with you on anything. Let me put it that way, blanketly. Now, you ask a question that is like, I think Hillel or Shammai were asked to teach the Torah on one foot. So you're asking me to solve all the problems and explain everything about Turkey in a small amount of time. But to begin with the earthquake, let's understand this. The earthquake is the greatest disaster in Turkish history. It is of such huge proportions that it literally causes us to rethink completely everything we thought about Turkey in terms of its politics, its people, the Turkish nation. Everything about it has, to use an analogy, a tectonic change of such proportions that we really are in unknown territory at this point. And one of the scholars has called it terra incognita, and it is. completely unknown. We don't know. A dystopian, and that's again another idea that's been put. Many of the scholars are saying this. We just don't know the scope of the disaster. We're all reading about it in the newspapers. I actually took a group of students from Maritime College to bring relief down to the Turkish consulate in New York, and I know that the ambassador is doing the same thing in Washington. The scope of it is incredible. People are still buried under the rubble. Regretfully, the amount of time that's passing, we're going to see less and less people surviving. The breadth and depth of this, it's like I said to a Turkish friend, it's like a sucker punch, a punch in the gut of the Turkish nation. I mean, this is something so momentous just a few, 7,000 plus buildings. We know the numbers we see rising to 40,000, but one number I saw here was that to rebuild the houses will cost World Bank $465 billion. And the effect on Turkey will be about at least 1% of GDP. This is not just, and millions are homeless, and on and on. We read about it in the paper every day, and it just is inconceivable to people. And I'm following it and talking to Turkish friends, people literally missing loved ones. We saw actually in the Jewish community, Antakya had some coverage where the leaders of that community, husband and wife, died and the Torah scrolls were almost destroyed. Rabbi Hittrick was reporting on that. I mean, the dimensions of it. Antakya as a city is gone. These are gone. And, all kinds of questions about why that happened in terms of the structures and so forth. We can touch on that if you'd like. So I think the one question is really, if you want to look at the way we are right now in terms of the political side, it's kind of a bit of a confusion in the sense that President Erdogan had moved the elections back to May 14th from June 18th. June 18th is the constitutional deadline, 5 years from June 2018, by which elections must take place under the Constitution. Now, there's been a lot of talk in Turkey among some elements about postponing this election. This is as big as can be, because under the Constitution, you cannot extend the election except one exception in time of war. There is no war, so it's unlikely they can do that. So, that's the first really incredible question. The other question is interesting point, because many of the regions are destroyed. So how do you set up an election? Now, the other avenue, which has been, now the President Erdogan has established a state of emergency that goes on for, I think, 3 months, and he could extend that. And that could be problematic because in the regions, if there's a state of emergency, that could affect the implementation of the election. So, we're in a very, very fraught situation. Now, there are opposition parties in Turkey that have announced, it's called the Table of Six. It's 6 parties kind of grouped together. One of the leaders of the opposition is Kılıçdaroğlu, who is the Republican People's Party head. And, and the fact is they've talked about revamping the system, including the opposition, reducing the power of the president, putting back the prime minister. That was one of the main changes that took place. I actually met the prime minister of Turkey when he came to New York. There is no prime minister, really. And so their checks and balances system say the opposition will put it in place. To be very candid about it, İmamoğlu, who was the mayor of Istanbul and actually defeated the AK party in Istanbul, and Ankara was defeated as well, is actually now in court proceedings because he's been, at least the government is trying to ban him from running and arrest him for making comments against his opponent. So, I have to say about Turkey in general, not just the earthquake, but anytime I do a talk on Turkey, I even not an earthquake, I have to check to see what happened in Turkey that day, because it's just moves along so quickly with so many complexities. Now, of course, the earthquake is the ultimate complexity. So I think I've outlined a little bit about what the problems are in terms of politics. As far as the Turkish people, they are shell-shocked. They are shell-shocked with this. They have relatives and friends that can't be found. They have, and there are some, I've reached out to many of my friends. Some live in Istanbul and live in other areas which are not affected by the earthquake. But some I saw on Facebook where someone was writing, well, did you see my father, my mother, and all of that? So I mean, kind of a little bit reminiscent in a way of 9/11, where people were looking for loved ones. One has to feel for that. I had to say, just on the earthquake, looking at the consulate and seeing the effort that they're making there each day to pack up things that are needed for these people suffering in Turkey is just incredible labor of love by Turks for their country. It is something to see, and I urge everyone, and this has been also something in the Jewish community in New York, has been New York Board of Rabbis, and also I think in DC, the ambassador has been reaching out to the Jewish community, that people should, and to everybody, not just Jews, everybody should try to see if there's a way they can find a way to donate some coats and other items that are sorely needed for the Turkish relief. But the dimensions of it are just gigantic. Obviously, this affects every aspect. Now, the point I think that would be important to kind of then go back to Shoshana on is this one. Who are your friends? Turkey's had all kinds of complex relationships with many countries. Armenia, certainly, in terms of, no border, no relations, just very, very bad. And of course, the whole issue of the Armenian so-called genocide, quote unquote, is a big issue. Greece, Turkey and Greece have been at odds for years and years. And Israel has had a very fraught relationship with Turkey. Now, look who's giving aid to Turkey. The Greeks have been giving aid, huge amounts of aid. Armenia has been there. The foreign minister or prime minister they built a bridge between Armenia and Turkey. They're building it that's been broken for years. And Israel sent one of the biggest delegations for the relief, 450 personnel, and they did amazing things. I just have to say, from looking on Facebook, this is a personal observation, and looking at a beautiful picture of the Turkish map and kind of a sort of a map, not a map, but kind of a drawing about the suffering of Turkey with flags from many, many countries. And I have to say, I personally was very heartened to see the Israeli flag there. You might not have seen such a thing years ago. The Israelis have been front and center, and I assure you, the Turkish people know it. Now, last point. There was another earthquake back in 1999. It wasn't as big as the one back in the 30s, but that earthquake caused the rise of the AK Party, because the AK Party came in after the earthquake in 99 and said, here's your government. They didn't help you. Now I'll help you. Now the AK Party is being faced with an earthquake, and that is its challenge at this point. So we're facing an uncertain future, and the dimensions of which we really don't know, but it's going to be very, very hard, certainly for the people suffering there.
So it looks as if, from the initial reports, that the people in Turkey are very unhappy with the government. There's a lot of unhappiness with, let's say, building codes and preparation for earthquake. Does Erdogan see this, I don't know how to put it, as a potential reason to try to skirt the next election? Or can he see it as, well, look, I rallied everybody to come and help us, and so it helps me? Where do you think the public falls out when they think that the government wasn't very well prepared, but perhaps came back and did a pretty decent job anyway? Help him or hurt him?
I think, to be very candid about it, I've met President Erdogan a number of times, and he is truly one of the most politically astute people in the world. Incredible. If you look, we'll talk later maybe about Ukraine. I mean, how is it that you have relations with Russia and you supply military equipment to Ukraine? Who can do that? So the answer is a mixed bag. I mean, because what his point was that he's going to provide money, stipends, and rebuild all the homes and do all of that. He's promised to do it. And for him, I think, and I haven't talked to him about it, but certainly a shell shock for him in a big way, because of course this was something totally unexpected. And as far as the building and so forth and all of those issues are certainly out there. The full dimensions of what they are also not known. I mean, you see buildings standing and buildings falling down. I mean, people are looking at that and they're saying, what's it all about and why did this occur? I mean, it is really not known, but I'm quite sure that, the opposition parties are going to bring that up, obviously, in the election much more and more, and they're doing that. And that's clearly the big issue. The other point, I think, which has been highlighted by many Turkish commentators, is the aid that was provided by the military and the government and the speed in which it was done. And that has been something that's been debated in the Turkish press and the Turkish media, no question. And then you had the foreign countries coming and they were rushing aid to Turkey. And so it's kind of, as I said, it's a picture that has many aspects to it. And, right now, the Turkish people are trying to figure out how they're going to rescue anyone who is living, how they're going to deal with the millions of homeless and getting them help and aid and simple things like warm coats and tents and things like that. That's what they're focusing on now. They're not really focusing on these bigger macro issues. But when this moves along, and no doubt that the Turkish nation is going to be thinking about it, but what they do about it is also an unknown, because look, there have been ups and downs in Turkey. There have been coups. There have been all kinds of things that have happened. The Turkish nation moves along and it perseveres. And that's the one thing about Turks. And I did want to say this. I started my notes for this talk. I wrote one word on the piece of paper. As I said, what should I start with? And I said it was the following. When we do a toast, we say skol, but we do it in other circles, we say l'chaim, to life, we say. But what do the Turks say when they toast? They say sherifeh, to our pride. And if you don't realize how important that is, you're missing something important. Turkish pride is really at the essence of how the Turks see the world. Do you respect us? Do you treat us with graciousness? We feel, we Turks say, we are hospitable. We're the nicest people in the world. Yet the world doesn't give us a fair shake. They don't. The United States sanctions us and they pressure us to admit Sweden and Finland into NATO when Sweden has all these things they're doing with the PKK and on and on and on. So that's how they look at it. And I think they're also looking at how does the world treat us in terms of this cataclysmic event. Is really, really important to understand that they don't feel that they are alone. Because if you look back in history a little bit, and you look back at the beginning of the Turkish Republic and Ataturk, what was really going on there? The whole world was trying to dismember Turkey into little pieces and destroy the Ottoman Empire, destroy the Turkish people. Ataturk came along, saved the day, and that's why Ataturk, the father of the Turks. I have a friend, a very dear friend, Turkish friend. He had a daughter. He said, I have a daughter of Ataturk. Can you imagine? I mean, really. When we have kids here, we don't go, George Washington just had a kid. We don't do that. But they say it, they treat Ataturk with such respect because it's all about the way in which the Turkish nation is respected. And I think right now, this is the opportunity for all these countries to show their good feelings towards Turkey. And believe me, especially with Israel, this is going to go a long way to dispel many of the things that have been maybe stereotypes about Israel, Greece, Armenia, and so forth. And that, I think, could be an important development, of course, with the caveat, depending on who's in the government. But hopefully that is the trajectory where we're going, where some of these disputes can be solved. Disputes can be solved. But the problem that you have in that area, we know, are these ancient, old hostilities, which everybody remembers, and nobody will ever take that baggage and put it aside. And hopefully with this event and the way the world has poured its heart out to Turkey, then the Turks will see, these people, America, Greeks, they really are friends. And I think that is if there's anything good that's come out of this, by the way, not this is a good thing to have Iranian planes anywhere, but you had an Iranian plane, a Qatari plane, an Israeli plane sitting on the tarmac in Istanbul, in Turkey, providing aid. Where would you see this? It just is a phenomenon that united all these cast of characters on a very worthwhile humanitarian mission.
So one can hope that it continues, but when you say the word Israel, our listeners jump up and they throw some questions in the pot. So let me put two of them together. One is, Turkey has said all the right things here to Israel and about Israel, for sure. Question is, can Israel rely on that to continue? Is this simply Turkey being opportunistic and saying, yes, we've got what we need from Israel right now, and so yes, we're going to say all the right things, but maybe later we're not? Because the other person wrote in pointing out that part of Israel's rescue delegation, United Hatzalah, had
That's
to
right.
leave Turkey
That's right.
because of the threat.
Right.
On the other hand, it was the Turkish government that caught the threat and gave the information to the Israelis. So that's a kind of mixed bag. But what they want to know is Turkey's niceness to Israel now opportunistic? Or do you really see this as the beginning of Turkey perhaps getting rid of Hamas in its capital and taking a position about Israel that will be friendlier and more beneficial to everybody as time goes on?
Well, I mean, I think if you look a little back in history in terms of there were very halcyon days with Israel. Israel provided very high-level weaponry to Turkey. There were close relations between the militaries. That did somewhat dissipate, and then we had the Mavi Marmara, which was that confrontation, and a lot of bad atmosphere, bad things, and that's been a problem. But of course, we had an apology on the tarmac. We did all the things that were requested by Turkey were done. And again, the relations were re-upped, and then they were canceled again because of something in Jerusalem. So that's a bit of a roller coaster. But recently, even before the earthquake, we know President Herzog went, met with Erdogan, and they had a beautiful, can you imagine the Turkish band playing Hatikva? I mean, beautiful. I mean, so a lot of beautiful and great things were already happening, and connections between Israel and Turkey, and exchange of ambassadors. So that was already in place, and that was happening. Because I think that, I remember a number of years ago, I was having lunch with a guy in Istanbul, a Turkish businessman. And at that time, he said to me, he said, we have so much in common with the Israelis, we like hummus, we like falafel, we like all this stuff. And I want to deal with them, but I can't, And so now I think there's going to be more of an impetus to have the better person-on-person relations between Israel and Turkey. And truth of the matter is the trade levels have been either stable or increasing. They're not huge, but they have been ongoing, even in the period of the problems that existed between Israel and Turkey. And I would say, as an important aside, the American foreign policy and the Abraham Accords, which were implemented in the Trump administration, really proved to be an important trajectory for American foreign policy. And we see some amazing things. I mean, look, you have to be realistic about it, but it is pretty good. We see Israel having relations with countries nobody would have believed, and even talking to Saudi Arabia. Can you imagine? That is a miracle, right? I say the miracle of Hanukkah. The other miracle of Hanukkah was they had the first candle lighting in the Turkish consulate of New York with the Turkish Jewish community, with a live feed from the chief rabbi of Turkey. It was and the Israeli consul and the Turkish consul general. I don't know if you like latkes or you like applesauce. To me, that was absolutely delicious. The situation is the trajectory. If I'm Turkey and I look at this trajectory, I'm thinking that they would want to be part of a good trajectory in the Middle East. I think some of the things that they've done so far have not been productive. And the point about Hamas, I mean, this is an imponderable. Can this be achieved that you talked about to get Hamas expelled from Turkey? It's just out there as an issue, and I don't know how it would be resolved. But clearly, Israel and Turkey have found a denouement, a rapprochement. They are at a level where we were always hoping they would be, and I think it can only get better. Unless there's a kerfuffle or a problem. That's what we've seen in Turkish-Israeli relations. Things are moving along, and suddenly there's a glitch. And hopefully we have dispute resolution and discussions, and we have ambassadors. This is the point I always said to the Turks. I said, have an ambassador. We had an ambassador from Russia during the Cold War in the United States. That's why you have ambassadors in place. It's almost like a fuse box. You can talk to somebody and not have the whole thing go and the fuse blow. You can talk to somebody and prevent a catastrophe. So I think that we're in a good place, and the earthquake relief was much more and adding sort of icing on the cake to make it even better. And the Turkish people saw it and recognized it, and that is very, very good. But, you know, as one, we had a diplomat come to the synagogue, a Moroccan diplomat, he said, you know, a prognostication in politics, he said, is like astrology being a pure science. You know, if you ask me what would happen tomorrow in these relations, I would say I'll be optimistic, but I can't predict it. But I do think if you look at the atmospherics, I think they are extremely good. And the thing you're talking about, where the Hatzalah delegation, you know, there are things going sub rosa and working. I'm sure they're working together on issues like this to make sure in terms of safety overall.
Well, it wasn't actually the first time that the Turks had brought up a threat to Israel or Jewish concerns. There was a synagogue not too long ago that apparently was under threat, and the Turkish.
I've heard of it myself. From an Israeli diplomat, so no, there's no question about it.
So maybe we should have saved that for the end, because I like to end on a positive note, because I'm now going to raise two other sets of issues that maybe are not so positive. One being NATO Turkey relations, and the other being US Turkey relations. Let's start with the NATO. Where are they? Is NATO going to pressure Turkey on the subject of Sweden? Turks have already said they'll vote for Finland. They're not inclined to vote for Sweden for their own reasons, their own security reasons. How are they doing with NATO right now?
Well, you know, you are right on the latest news. It's Shoshana with the latest news. Jens Stoltenberg, I think today, actually, or yesterday, said it is time now for Turkey to approve Sweden and Finland to enter NATO. Now, it's time now. It's the opportune time now. So here's the point. I think, first of all, the interesting question, which was asked actually in an interview I did on Turkish television, can Finland be admitted without Sweden? And I always say it's kind of Macy's or Bloomingdale's. It's a match set. Their two go together, and they're very important together in terms of pushing back Russia. Not having a hostility with them, but it's very, very important. I pulled out, there's a trilateral memorandum, as there is about everything. In June, Turkey, Sweden, and Finland entered into a memorandum which would pave the way for Turkey to approve. Now, NATO is interesting. It's like the Articles of Confederation. You have to have unanimous vote to let somebody, you know, do anything. So it's kind of I think it's a bad idea. But in any event, you know, Finland apparently, you know, satisfied the issue. Sweden did extradite some people, but the problem was there was a far right, some awful person who burned the Quran in front of the Turkish embassy or consulate in Sweden. Turks were very upset about that. They didn't feel the Swedes did enough to deal with that. So they had a very visceral thing. I think the answer on this one is, I would say, we could end with this too, but we don't have to. And the point being is, I am not pessimistic about it. I do believe, and again, one can believe till tomorrow, I think that at this point, Turkey needs to get as much goodwill. Actually, it's got a lot of goodwill from the Europeans, right? It's got a lot of outpouring from the Europeans. And I think maybe they could approach a little bit like an American businessman. You know, you get what you can and you make the deal. And they have gotten a lot more than they had when they brought up this issue. So I think I'm going to be optimistic about it in light of the fact that they've got the earthquake, they've got the Europeans. And the other point, and I think this will be a segue in a way, is the F-16s. They want to get the F-16s from the United States, both F-16s and parts, to modernize some planes that they have. And that has been, in a way, Senator Menendez, the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, has said no, 1,000 times no. And I think that if Turkey stepped up and said, okay, you know, we're unhappy, we're working with them, we're trying to do what we said under the trilateral memorandum, we're going to approve it so that that we can pursue peace in Europe, right? In terms of Ukraine and Russia. they will get a lot of goodwill, and a lot of, I think, the opposition in Congress will dissipate to show that goodwill. I think, but you don't know that, but I think that would be a very, very strategic point on their part. And I think that to mess with it right now is not a good thing.
Part of Menendez's problem is that Turkey wants the Russian S-400 air defense system. And Menendez does not want Turkey to have F-35s next to a Russian system because they are concerned, and he is concerned, rightfully, in my opinion, that the Russians end up with a lot of information that they wouldn't otherwise have. So do we have to get Turkey to give up the Russians? Can you get Turkey to give up the Russians? Do the Turks want to give up the Russians? So now we open another door, which is to say we're going to talk about Turkey and Russia. And that, of course, is going to lead us to Ukraine. So what does Turkey have to do to satisfy the Menendezes, who make what I think is a valid point about U.S. security in those airplanes?
Look, I mean, the thing with the S-400, again, to go back a little bit, I mean, the S-400 is a smart system, as you say. It can pull information, which could be very damaging on the F-35, which is our super stealth fighter. And actually, Turkey got punished. They were kicked out of, literally, the Turkish pilots, trainees were all, sent home. And that was a big, and I think Greece has them, other countries get them, and Turks complaining about it. But fact is, they took that S-400. And if you ask the Turks, why did you do that? And their answer will invariably be, we wanted the Patriots, but Obama wouldn't give us the Patriots for defense. Okay, when that's their answer, whether it's right or wrong, is, honestly, at this point is somewhat irrelevant in the sense that they perceive it as such. Now, about the S-400, the question is it still in the boxes from Amazon, or have they opened it up and, started playing around with it? So I believe, now, I know President Erdogan was talking a while back that he wanted to get another S-400 system, which I think, and then he even talked about the Sukhoi fighters. He was going to order those as well. So I think, and it just, I think that is a little bit, it's not strategic, but it's just doing that to get a point across. But the fact of the matter is what they should do. And by the way, I think the Russians have said they're not taking it back. There are no refunds. They put it on the receipt. Whatever billions of dollars you paid for it, too bad. No refunds, just like at the department Macy's, you bought the S-400, you keep it. And in fact, I think somebody even said they could use it to, attach it to something and give rides, like camel rides on the S-400 or some silly thing like that. It is a matter of pride also for Turkey because, they want to be seen as a major power and they had this thing, but it was a misstep. And it's clear. And by the way, they were sanctioned for it. They were sanctioned under the Countering American Adversaries Act, CAATSA. And in fact, President Trump sanctioned them, even though President Trump was, he was the one who allowed the sanctions to go through because he had to, because Congress passed in the NDAA, National Defense Authorization. They passed this procedure in there. He had no choice. But what was the sanction? It wasn't even a slap on the wrist. They sanctioned, I think, the president of something called the Defense Institute or something of presidency of who knows what it is. Nobody even heard. It wasn't anything really punitive. It was kind of to show that we were unhappy about it, but they were punished with the F-35 and they were punished with the CAATSA sanctions. Now, and I think, if I remember correctly, there was a provision in the last fiscal year legislation that they took out because they wanted to be able to do the F-16s. Now, on the F-16s, that's a whole other story. The F-16s could go to Turkey, but as you say, some say there's a hold on it. Certainly, Senator Menendez says no, absolutely not, and he's a very powerful figure. However, our President Biden, has said that he wants Turkey to get this weaponry. So I think with Turkey's help to Ukraine, and with maybe doing this NATO in the chess game, doing the NATO approval of Sweden and Finland, he might have enough pieces on the chessboard to be able to overcome the opposition, because he's not getting the F-35, that's for sure. Whether America can force Turkey to pack up the S-400 and recycle it, I don't know if that's happening, but he hasn't opened the box. It's sort of a stalemate on that. So at the end of the day, Hopefully the United States will approve it because Turkey is a NATO ally and we have important bases in Turkey. So it is that commitment to do that is something that, I think Turkey deserves. But again, there are all of these labyrinthine steps that have to be traversed in order to approve it. And I think they have now the Congress, to talk about the Congress. Look, with what's happening with Armenia and Greece, I think it's, if you want to look a little bit like, if you're Tip O'Neill and you're thinking all politics is local, what you're thinking is, if you see Armenia and Turkey having, meeting and the leaders are talking, and Greece, and that's where the opposition in Congress is coming from, and the Greek lobby, Armenia lobby, that's always been stalwartly opposed to any aid to Turkey in terms of military and on and on. They've been, so I think that there are a lot of moving parts here as the relations hopefully improve. That opposition in Congress, I think, might become less severe. And that is another offshoot that will be very important for Turkey, because Turkey and the administrations have always been, whether it's President Trump or Obama or Biden, very supportive of helping Turkey and close relations with Turkey. Yes, there have been kerfuffles, of course, but where the locus of the opposition has been, it's been in Congress. In Congress, and in particular, at least as Turks perceive it, in the lobbies in Congress, which have lobbied against Turkey in a very, very effective fashion. And now I think maybe that could be mollified, and NATO approval, these closer relations could reap benefits. So if you're asking me if that's opportunistic, I don't know if it's opportunistic, but I think it's certainly a good strategic step for Turkey to do what it's doing with Armenia and do what it's doing with Greece. These are their neighbors in their region. It will help Turkey also on Cyprus and on the Eastern Mediterranean. There are so many things that, oddly, because of this tragedy, have now occurred. I mean, who would have thought? We were stuck in a mire on Cyprus, on Eastern Med, on Armenia, on Greece, on the Aegean Islands, right? We had a whole issue there with the Greeks, where President Erdogan was condemning Mitsotakis, was talking about, possible, hostilities, fighting over a little island that the Greeks had placed troops on. And now we have Greek diplomats coming and extending their arms and their hearts to the Turkish people. And the Turkish people will see it and they will understand it. Absolutely. I'm confident of that.
Now, given that everything is opportunistic, your word, everything is opportunistic. So Turkey has been a good ally to the United States in terms of Ukraine and helping Ukraine. Is it possible that this drives a wedge between Turkey and Russia that will also help Turkey reattach itself more securely to NATO and stop? A little bit of this is fooling around. Turkey says, well, if you don't like me, I'll go talk to my buddies, the Russians. But is it possible that Turkey's position on Ukraine will help cement Turkey properly into NATO and push the Russians out a little bit?
I was trying to think of an analogy, but I think like it's my wife and myself holding my grandson's hands. I want to pull him to me. My wife wants to pull my grandson to her. This is exactly what's happening, the US and Russia with Turkey. I mean, it's just, and the way in which this has been balanced is really quite extraordinary. Think about it, right? Turkey does not adopt the sanctions. It doesn't follow them, right? It provides drones to Ukraine. In fact, there's even a song in Turkey about the Bayraktar drone. Can you believe it? I mean, it's not Lady Gaga, but isn't that crazy? And that's been very helpful. And remember, Erdogan negotiated a grain deal in the Black Sea to bring grain out to the rest of the world when it was stuck, right? He's also used, somewhat strategically, Turkey's control over the straits, right? Under the Treaty of Montreux, the Convention Montreux, to make sure that this, does not escalate any further in terms of Russian hostilities. So it's very, very important. As far as the relationship with Russia, look, Turkey has fought, I think it's at least 17 wars Turkey's fought about 17 wars with Russia in its history, okay? So it's been a fraught relationship. But in terms of, that's historical. And they had some big problems with Russia, but they also need Russia because of Syria. We didn't really talk about Syria and what Turkey wants to achieve in Syria. Russia is the linchpin of that, absolutely no question. Now, why Russia is in Syria and why Iran is in Syria is something one can scratch one's head. And why is Iran there? It's just simply impossible and horrific. But the fact is they are there, and that's a reality. And Russia is a powerful, powerful country. Okay, so Turkey's relationship with Russia, look, Russians are building a nuclear plant for Turkey in Akuyu. Russia provides a tremendous amount of energy resources for Turkey. Very important. Now they're trying to find alternative sources of energy, but they're dependent. They're a market. There's all kinds of connections here. They can't just suddenly sever them. So what they've done is they figured out a way to be like, I don't know, this kind of, I hate to use maybe a Yiddish idea, but to dance at every chasana, to dance at every wedding. They're at the Russians, they're at the Americans, they're at with Syria, they're with everybody, and they're able to, and this is the amazing thing, they're able to maintain this kind of balancing approach. So I think the answer is it's a push and a pull. Turkey's always been, look where Turkey, as my diplomat friend said, we are living in a tough neighborhood. This neighborhood is so difficult. It's right in the hot epicenter of crisis, no question. Syria, Russia, you name it, it's right there. So they need to be the masters of balancing and juggling lots of competing pressures and problems that they have faced historically. And I think the one on Ukraine, and again, the Congress, I'm sorry, but Tip O'Neill, all politics is look at the obviously the Congress sees what Turkey is doing on Ukraine and they're helping Ukraine. And that is very, very significant for our Congress to see that Turkey is on the side of helping Ukraine. No question about it. So again, and I believe I just read the Ukrainians themselves have provided aid to, even if they're in war, they provided aid to Turkey during its catastrophe. So, these moving pieces are very complicated. And obviously the Russia piece, historically, if you'll remember, the Turks shot down a Russian jet, if you remember, and it was a mistake and whatever. They were in airspace of Turkey, nobody knows. And then Russia punished Turkey with some sanctions and but then they lifted them. I think Erdogan went to Putin and apologized. I don't know, whatever it was. But the end of the day is that is a relationship that Turkey needs and cannot cast asunder and needs to manage. But obviously any relationship with Putin is problematic. I mean, there's no question about it. Russia is a bold and horrific aggressor, and it attacked the country for no reason. I mean, they have a reason, but it's not a legitimate reason among the family of nations to attack another nation and then now, kidnap children, move people in and out, attack civilians, and all the terrible things that they're doing. So again, Turkey's sitting on the side of, we're helping Ukraine. And they're not, I don't think if people look at it, they're really saying, well, Turkey's helping Russia with its aggression. That I don't think they're saying. So as long as that goes on, that will be a very good thing for Turkey.
Which is almost like the position Israel finds itself in vis-a-vis Russia, because Israel has equities in Syria, and they have to work with Russia to make sure that their interests in Syria are managed properly. And you were the one who raised Syria, which prompted 5 different people to send us questions. And everybody, please keep sending questions. That's good. Wanting to understand what Turkey is doing in Syria and how that relates to Iran and Russia. I know this is the fodder for another whole entire lecture. Please don't. Sure. But give us the short form so that people understand that one of the places that Turkey needs Russia and Russia needs Turkey. What happens in Syria?
Well, it's very hard to deconstruct the whole thing, but I think if you're asking Turks why they care about Syria, it really is all about the Kurds. I mean, what you have there is an offshoot of Kurds. Now, again, the Kurds are not monolithic. If you look a little bit into it, you'll see. And by the way, here's the thing: why is it the Kurds don't have their own state? And this is an interesting question. And the answer is, it's not just Turkey's fault, maybe it's partially, but that had to do with the Treaty of Sèvres and Lausanne and all those negotiations. And nobody wanted to give up any sovereign space to let the Kurds have their own state. That happened also to others around the world, other nationalities that couldn't get their own state, the Basques, you name it. There are many, many other such examples. So you have the Kurds in Kurdistan, allies of the United States, Iraqi Kurdistan. There are Kurds in Turkey, millions of Kurds in Turkey, and Kurds in Syria. Now, in Turkey, there is a terrorist organization. I call it a terrorist because the United States has the PKK on its terrorist list. Absolutely no question. I just saw on Twitter, and again, we must never believe everything we see on Twitter. But if this is true, it's about as horrible as the Hatzalah being threatened after being, somebody burned in Germany, the PKK. This is what they say. They were putting aid together, boxes, and somebody came and burned the boxes for relief for Turkey. Okay, and they say the PKK. Is it PKK? I don't know. Maybe somebody said so. Somebody did it. It's horrific. Whoever did it is awful. But the point is, the PKK, without a doubt, and the United States agrees with this, international organizations agree with this, they've attacked civilians and have killed thousands of people. If you ever go to Turkey and you look at at least in the period where this was quite rampant, you'd open up the paper and it would say 10 police officers killed by PKK. Okay, so, and this even, I don't know if it's PKK. Remember in Istanbul recently on Istiklal Street, some terrorists came and put a bomb and killed a number of people and injured many people. I mean, this does go on. Now, the question, let us say the 64 lira question, I think that's not much money, by the way, today with the exchange rate, is the groups in Syria, the YPG and the PYD, which are offshoots of the Kurds, right? Are they in fact linked to or supportive of the PKK? Now, my Turkish diplomat friends assure me, and this is the point, who are these people? Well, they are friends and allies of the United States. Why? Well, because they are the ones who stepped forward and fought ISIS and helped to destroy ISIS and put ISIS, the thugs, into prisons and did this work. And in fact, there were pictures on Twitter of American soldiers with YPG and PYD patches, which the Turks went crazy over. But the Americans have forged this alliance with the YPG and the PYD. And the Turks say, well, when the Americans give ordnance to the YPG and the PYD, it's immediately, this is what I was told, I'm just telling you I'm just repeating what I was told, is transshipped directly to the PKK in Turkey for its terrorist activities. So again, I didn't do an investigation. I don't know one way or the other, but here is the problem for Turkey. Turkey's problem is, and its worry, is that they do not want the Syrian Kurds, again, they're different groups, to create a statelet, their own sovereign statelet in Turkey. They're afraid because A, they believe it will be a launching point. I mean, it kind of sounds like the way the Israelis think about Gaza and think about the West Bank. I mean, same idea. They would set up a statelet and that would be a launching point for terrorist attacks and would actually give them sovereign justification for what they claim, what the Turks claim is a terrorist organization. Now, is it the same? Is it not? The Turks are 100% sure that this is a linked group. And they're very disappointed, and talking about U.S. foreign policy and U.S.-Turkish relations, very, very disappointed and upset with America's chummy behavior, chumminess with the YPG and the PYD. There's no question about it. And and so again, I can't conclude it for you. I could just tell you that that is the way they're thinking. Now, about Russia, clearly Russia is the key, because in order for the U.S. to end up doing what the U.S. wants to do in Syria, it needs to deconflict with Russia. Russia is a very important power in also the Syrian government. And now Turkey actually is was starting recently, whereas President Erdogan called Assad, we used to have good relations with Assad, then called him a butcher, and now apparently better relations with Syria could ensue as well as a result of the earthquake and onward. They were starting this already early on. So the answer is no end in sight on this one, but the earthquake may shift some thinking on this in terms of how this develops.
So speaking of ends, we have come to the end of our time together. And people who listen know that I like to go out on a high note. The first high note would be to say thank you very much, because this has been enormously enlightening. That's my high note. Your high note. What do you see as potential positive outcome here? Can be short, can be limited. Give us an optimistic note for the region.
Sometimes we say, out of terrible things can come something good. And I think out of this horrible earthquake with the suffering, the world has opened its eyes and is looking at Turkey in a way that maybe they didn't look at it before. These are people and they're suffering, and they have feelings for them, and they're heartbroken for them. And I think that is really, really important. That would be our congressmen and our senators and our leaders and the American people in general. Look at the coverage. The coverage of Turkey. And I think that, is interesting. One of the commentators was saying, I'm reading all this critical stuff, put it aside now. We have this urgent situation. Let's not carp and fight so much with each other. So maybe something could come out of this. That's a high note. That is to say that there will be better relations with the various parties in the region that comes out of this horrible situation that will last on after time moves on and people move on, but that these situations with Israel, Greece, Armenia, you name it, and Europe. And I think also the idea that Turkey understands it has friends, it has good friends. Yes, Turkey and the US and Turkey and there are allies. And yes, allies have misunderstandings and allies have disagreements. But the bottom line is that at the end of the day, we are friends of the Turkish people, and the Turkish people are friends of the American people. That's always going to be the case. And yes, there are going to be bumps and glitches. And I think hopefully that in the future, we have a brighter future with less tragedies, but that out of this comes good feelings, good relations, and good developments in that region, which will be amazingly helpful to tone down the tension that we see in world politics today. So that's I think actually there is a legitimate high note here.
I think you're right, a legitimate high note. And if we can go out on a legitimate high note, we've done our job. So let me say thank you on behalf of the Jewish Policy Center and the listeners to this webinar, and to the people who are going to download it later and listen to you. You've given us a lot to think about. And at the center of it is Turkey. And I think that's very interesting. So thank you again. And I hope we'll see you again.
Look forward to it. Thank you so much.